What if the last subway you ever boarded wasn't meant to take you home? Imagine it, just past midnight, an empty station, a train screeching to a halt, doors opening to a carriage lit too brightly for this hour. You step inside and the silence is absolute. The doors shut, the wheels drag against the rails, and you think you're alone. But at the very next stop, they appear. Dozens of passengers filing in, not commuters, not drifters heading home. Every one of them dressed in black, hands folded neatly in their laps, eyes fixed straight ahead. Rows of strangers dressed for a funeral. You sit among them. The train lurches forward, and that's when you realize not one of them is breathing. This isn't a folk tale whispered to frighten children. This isn't a bar story retold for cheap chills. This is the account of a man who boarded the wrong train and never made it back. It begins with the city after midnight, when the crowds have thinned, when even the streets above feel abandoned. The subway station sits hollow, concrete walls stained by decades of use, fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead, one flickering just enough to make the shadows shiver. The air is heavy, that mix of stale iron, damp concrete, and the faint sting of electricity. The kind of smell you only notice when you're standing alone, waiting for something that should have arrived minutes ago. On the platform, one man, ordinary. His suit jacket still wrinkled from the day, his tie loosened, his shoulders carrying the kind of fatigue that comes not from a single night, but from years of repetition. He checks his watch, though there's no reason to. No one else waits with him. The only sound, the hollow echo of his shoes as he shifts his weight from one foot to the other. Somewhere down the tunnel, a faint hum begins to rise. Low at first, then swelling into the unmistakable grind of steel against steel. The train is coming. Lights ripple across the curve of the tracks. The screech of metal builds, pressing against the silence like a warning. Wind pushes forward as the carriage hurtles into view, brakes shrieking until sparks spit into the darkness. And then it stops. Doors open with a groan, revealing a carriage far too bright for this hour. No chatter, no shuffle of movement. Just rows of vacant seats staring back at him. He hesitates for a breath. The tunnel behind him feels colder, emptier. So he steps forward. His shoes click against the yellowed platform tiles, each step carrying into the silence. He boards. The doors slam shut, and just like that, he is sealed inside. The doors sealed behind him with an unnatural heaviness. Not the usual hydraulic hiss. This was sharper, final, as though the sound itself was meant to erase the platform outside. The man shifted, already uneasy. The seats around him glared under harsh fluorescent tubes, fabric worn thin, patched in places, but spotless. Too spotless. The train shuddered forward, but instead of the usual smooth acceleration, it dragged, a sluggish pull, wheels scraping as though reluctant to move. Above his head, the intercom hissed to life, a burst of static, followed by a voice. But the words were wrong, stretched, distorted, vowels torn apart until they barely resembled language. He leaned closer, straining to catch just one phrase. Nothing. The message dissolved back into silence. He rubbed at his temple, exhaustion weighing heavier now. The only sound was the hum of the lights and the faint rattle of the wheels beneath, until something else joined it. A cough, quick, sharp, unmistakable. It echoed down the length of the carriage. He froze. His eyes darted to the reflection in the window opposite, but the rows behind him were empty, every seat vacant, no shadows shifting, no movement at all, only the echo of that cough rolling back through the silence. His breathing quickened. He scanned the doors, the windows, the floor. Nothing. Just the steady crawl of the train. And then, without warning, the lights flickered. One long, painful strobe that painted the cabin in flashes of white. His reflection blurred in the glass. For the briefest instant, he thought he saw another figure seated across from him. But when the light steadied, the seat was empty again. He forced his eyes away, gripping the pole beside him. The train pressed on, slower now, groaning like something injured. Finally, with a violent lurch, the train slammed to a halt. His body jolted forward, his hand tightening on the pole to keep from falling. The sudden silence was worse than the grinding wheels. For a moment he thought the power had cut, but the lights remained, humming faintly. Then came the sound, the sharp hiss of doors unlocking. The carriage stood at another station, empty, deserted. The tiles cracked, stained, as though no one had passed through in years. The sign above the platform glowed faintly, but the name was smeared, unreadable. The man stared out, waiting for someone, anyone, to appear. But no footsteps came. And then, the doors stayed open. Too long, far too long. Long enough that he realized maybe the train wasn't waiting for passengers. Maybe it was waiting for him. He told himself he would not step off, that whatever this forgotten station was, whatever waited in its shadows, he would not be the one to find out. He gripped the pole harder, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the cracked tiles outside. And then, just as quietly as they had opened, the doors began to slide shut. A grinding pull, metal dragging against metal, sealing him back inside. For the span of a heartbeat, he thought he was alone again, until he wasn't. Without warning, without sound, the carriage was no longer empty. The seats that stretched down its length were suddenly filled, every row occupied. Men in black suits, women draped in veils that hung just low enough to shadow their faces. Children too, pale, expressionless, hands folded neatly in their laps. Not one had entered. He hadn't seen the doors move wide enough, hadn't heard footsteps or shifting fabric. They were simply there. He blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs. No one looked at him. Not a single head turned. Every face was blank. Every eye was dull. They stared straight ahead, as though fixed on something only they could see. The hum of the train deepened, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. And in that silence, he noticed something else. Their shoes. Every one of them. From polished leather dress shoes to scuffed heels to the tiny buckled straps on children's feet. Wet. Water dripped steadily, pooling into faint, dark puddles across the floor. The sharp tap of droplets striking metal echoed through the carriage, louder than his own breathing. He glanced to the windows. The tunnel walls streamed by in dry, lifeless concrete. No rain, no storm. Nothing that explained the steady trails of water running down the passenger's shoes. He pressed back against his seat, the leather creaking beneath him. His throat tightened. He wanted to ask where they had come from, wanted to demand who they were. But something in him knew that to speak aloud, to break their silence, would be a mistake. So he sat, the only living sound in a carriage packed with figures dressed for mourning. The train lurched again, carrying him forward into darkness. He shifted in his seat, legs tightening, fingers drumming nervously against his knee. The sound felt too loud, clumsy against the heavy silence pressing in from every side. He glanced around, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice his movement. But no one turned. Not a single passenger acknowledged him. At last he spoke, a simple word. Hello. His voice cracked the air like glass against stone. Nothing. The silence held, not even the faintest flicker of recognition. The train rumbled on, dragging him further into its endless tunnels, and that was when he began to notice them more closely. The details, the quiet horrors hidden in their stillness. A woman 3 seats away, her veil falling low across her face. In her hands a bouquet of roses. Not fresh, wilted, their petals curled, darkened at the edges, stems slick with decay. She clutched them so tightly the thorns cut into her palms. But she did not flinch. She did not bleed. Across the aisle, an old man leaned forward, his eyes sunken, lips moving silently. No sound emerged, yet his mouth worked steadily, rhythmically, as though repeating a prayer that only he could hear. Beside the door, a child sat perfectly still. In his small hands, he held a toy train. Its paint was chipped, its wheels missing. He gripped it so hard his knuckles whitened, but the toy remained lifeless. The man's skin prickled. He pulled in a breath and held it, ears straining. Beneath the grinding of the wheels, beneath the electric hum of the lights, something else seeped into the air. Music. Faint. Almost imperceptible. The low, drawn-out tones of an organ. The kind of sound you might hear in an empty cathedral, echoing endlessly into stone halls. The longer he listened, the clearer it became. Slow, mournful notes that seemed to drip into the carriage like water into a cave. Notes that belonged not to the living, but to something else. And then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. A long stutter that bathed the passengers in broken frames of white and shadow. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself against the strobing glow. And when the lights steadied, his chest locked. The seat beside him was empty. Moments before, a man had been there. Dark suit, blank stare, dripping shoes. But now, nothing. Not a trace. Only the faintest wet imprint on the fabric. As though he had been sitting there all along and had simply decided to leave. The man's pulse hammered in his ears. The empty seat beside him was more terrifying than the presence that had filled it. He dragged his gaze toward the windows, needing distraction, needing proof that the world outside still existed. But the world outside had changed. The tunnel walls were gone. What remained was blackness, a depth so absolute it felt less like darkness and more like absence itself. And yet through it something flickered. Candle flames, hundreds of them, stretching into the void, and then the intercom crackled overhead. A hiss of static, broken by a single word. His name. He froze, throat tightening until breath refused to pass. His name repeated, softer this time, as though the train itself had learned to breathe it. The passengers remained still, their stares fixed ahead. Not one of them moved. The stations they passed grew stranger. Tiles cracked and broken, benches rusted through. Dust and grime coated the platform floors as though no one had walked across them in decades. His chest burned with dread. He stumbled toward the doors at the end of the carriage, grabbing the handle, yanking. It didn't move. Locked. Turning back, his eyes landed on the window again. His reflection stared back, trembling. But the seats behind him were empty. Yet in the reality around him, they were still full. The reflection told him he was alone, but the reality told a different story. He closed his eyes. A memory surfaced, a story his grandmother once told. The death train. A phantom that appeared only after midnight, a vessel that carried those who wandered too far into loneliness, exhaustion, despair. As a child, he dismissed it. But now, staring at the lifeless figures around him, every detail matched. His phone vibrated. He pulled it from his pocket. On the screen, a single message. Last call. Answer or remain. His thumb hovered. In the corner of his vision, a veiled woman tilted her head as if waiting for his decision. He forced his hand back. No, he would not touch it. The glow dimmed, leaving only his reflection staring back at him, wide-eyed. The organ music swelled, the drip of water quickened. The air itself seemed to lean in, waiting, and he knew with certainty he had already been given his warning. Then came the movement. A man in a black suit seated just across the aisle. His head turned, not naturally. It rotated stiffly, mechanically, until his face pointed directly at him. Pale skin, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Then another passenger turned, and another, until every figure in the carriage faced him. The silence fractured. At first a murmur, then a wave of whispering, blending into rhythm. They were chanting his name. He stumbled to his feet, yanking the emergency brake. Nothing. Useless. The train did not stop. The chant grew louder, vibrating through his bones. The air dropped in temperature. His breath spilled out in white vapor. Theirs did not. He ran down the aisle, slamming against the driver's cabin door. Locked. Peered through the glass, empty. No driver, no conductor. The train drove itself. He staggered back as the carriage behind him stretched, the walls pulling away, at the doors receding into distance. The whispers shifted. Stay. Ride with us. Don't leave us behind. The lights exploded into chaos, flickering violently. The carriage rocked as though it were derailing. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his ears as the voices poured into him. And then, silence. The rocking steadied. The lights hummed steady again. He lifted his head. The carriage was empty. Every seat bare. But on the seat across from him lay a funeral program. He reached for it with trembling hands. His name was printed on the cover. Beneath it, today's date. The train slowed. Through the window, a station came into view. The platform was filled, not with people, with coffins, lined in perfect rows. The doors hissed open, and he knew the train wasn't opening for anyone else. It was opening for him. He was never seen again. No coworkers reported him at the office the next morning. No neighbors saw him return. His apartment remained exactly as he had left it. It was as though the subway swallowed him whole. Some say he stepped off that night, onto the platform lined with coffins, and never came back. Others whisper he stayed on board, riding endlessly into tunnels that no longer exist on any map. But every telling shares the same ending. Once boarded, the last train out does not let you off alive. In the funeral program he found, local legends claim it always bears the same detail. Not just the rider's name, but the exact date of their final journey. It is said those who encounter the death train vanish from the world of the living, remembered only by a handful of eerie clues. A wallet left behind, a ringing phone that no one answers, a final glimpse of someone stepping onto the subway and never stepping back out. The man's story ends there, his seat empty, his program left behind. But the question that lingers is not about him. It is about you, because every legend carries a warning. The death train does not wait for the lost. It comes for the living too, the exhausted, the alone, the ones who take just one wrong train at the wrong hour. The real question is, when the train comes for you, will you recognize it? The last train out is still running, and maybe tonight, it's closer than you think.